if you actually have a true north, then you never lose sight of I think the investment required. The opportunity that I was always seeking was not to close and not to sell, but to earn the right to be your trusted advisor.
Welcome to the Nuance Effect. Today we have Mason Walker. Here's why everyone should know Mason. He started at a company called Audigy, first employee other than the founder. Ended up being their CEO, having a 77 times EBITDA exit to a publicly held company. Then he went and explored the national parks with his family for, what was it, 9 months? 18 months.
18
Holy
months.
smokes. Yeah. Lived in an RV with his fam, reset, and then decided to put literally the lifestyle inside of a lifestyle brand with Bourbon Lore. This thing is like otherworldly. The level of access is stupid. We'll talk about it a little bit, but today we're going to mostly talk about Audigy. So, Mason, when I think about the Nuance Effect and like the idea of like you find this audience that's really important to your brand, that is typically ignored, and then you put all sorts of attention into understanding them, figuring out how to adapt to their needs, and then setting up reward systems that actually lead to you and that audience being aligned and to drive profit. I feel like Audigy did that really exceptionally well. So
Thank you.
when I think about Audigy, what problem, what was missing for audiologists and these small practices when you guys were starting?
Yeah, I think it's first of all, thank you for the lovely intro, John. I appreciate it. Well done. I think there's been a variety of well-known authors over the years that have talked about the power of human connection and how critical that level of authenticity is, and being able to have the trust necessary to even get a shot at being able to provide value to someone, where you get to solve a point of friction or a point of challenge. I think for a lot of us, right, when we think about being able to focus on that, the who, the what, the why, there's always this aspect of how we go about what we have to offer. And I think even for our doctors, right, that element of, I'm a technician at heart. I love this craft that I get to serve. I love this, this tool or product in which I get to provide that has some form of an impact to the consumer, and in our situation, to the patients that they have the ability to treat. But the reality is, for many of them, they get too focused and too caught up in the what they do and the how they do it. And at some point along the way, they lose sight of that why that originally drove them in the first place, which is that level of, I would say, truth and the power of how they bring what they have to offer to the consumer in a way that resonates in this powerful, connection. And then the who they get to do it with, which is the power of that team, right? So for many of us, there's this ability to know that I can only have so many ideas and there's only so many hours in the week. So how do I create a movement around this cause and this purpose, where it's not just a job, it's not just a job description, it's not just a position in the four wall. So that nuance effect really comes down to, how do I create that spark for me personally, as the executive, as the primary point of influence, as the owner of that practice? How do I transfer that spark to a team where it really resonates and comes to life with them every day they show up, not just sporadically or coincidentally, maybe in a week or in a month? And then ultimately, how do I transfer that spark from my team to those I serve? And so I would say that nuance effect is the challenge that probably many of us seek in a variety of business environments. And I would say we found a unique moment where we realized that we had to move from making the recommendations around best practices to creating a true connection with the doctor around not what is realistic, meaning where they've already been and how can they continue to deliver on where they've been, maybe more profitably or maybe with better margin or more efficiently, but where do they still desire to be and the long-term vision of why they are doing what they do. And that's a whole kind of conversation that we have around what we call PPS, or these personal, professional, and financial aspirations that we map out in alignment with the practice.
So let me zoom way out. Effectively, Audigy is an MSO for audiologists, right?
Yeah, if you look at the healthcare kind of side of the equation, you have management service organizations or MSOs, and you have what's called a GPO or group purchasing organization. And our aspiration was, could we bring some of the greatest aspects of that MSO to life, but for independent wholesale practice, right? Meaning private practice doctors. And could we find a way to monetize those services through the GPO component with that aggregated group purchasing?
Audiologists are a little different because they also have inventory, right?
Correct. I mean, obviously, there's a big product component, which is the hearing device itself. And so, yes, there's a service component associated with testing and diagnostics, but the majority of the revenue associated with that four wall in an audiology practice is representative of the number of hearing devices that they dispense based around the patients they treat.
So most MSOs and GPOs do some version of what you were explaining. And I'm sure there are other organizations out there trying to like roll up audiologists. But it sounds like you're thinking more deeply about like what's that professional's experience and how can we support it, right? Like, because you show me an audiologist, I'm guessing I can show you someone that doesn't want to run payroll. Like, that's probably not why they went to school, right? They probably weren't like, man, you know what gets me excited? Bookkeeping.
Yeah, I would say many of our audiologists have not even had the opportunity to take a business course. And so
Yep.
I think often in small business in particular, which is the category that we serve, which is what I love from an industry perspective, small business is the heartbeat and the backbone of the US. It is what is representative of obviously the mass majority of business operations that are taking place domestically here in the US, but it's also the area that's most underserved when it comes to infrastructure, right? When it comes to access to capital, when it comes to the ability to have strategy and direction that allows for them to be able to understand kind of where this market opportunity is for them. And so if we can facilitate for that, for them, any of those areas, we're immediately adding value. And for a lot of us, I would say, in whatever industry we serve, we didn't necessarily get into that particular industry or category based around the fact that we thought we were going to create the world's greatest product. There's a purpose and a cause of, I want to be able to bring this gift that I have, and that gift for many of them was a medical gift of being able to provide some quality of life or greater quality of life in their hearing when it comes to their hearing loss, and being able to treat that. So just by circumstance, I'm now quote unquote an entrepreneur. I've hung my own shingle. I thought that I could potentially bring this craft that I love to life in a way that maybe couldn't happen in a traditional environment, whether that's in a hospital or a roll up or in a franchise model. I wanted to go out and be able to do this in a way that I truly felt like I was able to provide the highest quality of care, consistently at the level that I wanted to, which meant that I had to do it on my own. And so fast forward, I think for many of them, they've been blessed to be able to have a patient following and a level of impact in that market, but they're just scraping the surface with what's still possible. But for many of them, they only know what they know, which is the existing footprint that they have basically kind of built and operated in, not by necessarily strategic design and platform development, but by just showing up one day after another to treat this gift that they
Yeah.
love,
Treat
which is their
more
ability.
patients,
Yeah.
add more sites,
Yeah.
hire more
Yeah.
providers.
So
Yep.
yeah. So I think being able to bring that reference point, as well as a partner to them, and not just an MSO and GPO, which is, hey, am I normal? Do I technically have everything covered in this, three point of sale location, or this, three point of sale office that I operate out of these, this regional market? And so those points of reference are incredibly powerful, just like when reading a new book, listening to a new podcast. We're all trying to grab those little nuggets of opportunity.
Well, yeah. I mean, the best ideas in my mind have already happened. You just need to find them and apply them. It's R&D.
Yeah.
Rip off and
Yeah.
duplicate. Um, so with nuanced leadership, like when I think about the things that drive it, one of the big things is like this idea of adaptability or generosity, where you're like willing to lose a battle to win the war. I know from talking to you a number of times, like your organization would take big risks where it's like we assume if we invest in our partners, they'll continue working with us and expand that relationship. Can you talk to me a little about how you did that, how it changed over time?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, that power of vision is sometimes underestimated, meaning if you actually have a true north, that is your long term aspiration of what you believe is possible, to where I'm not just trying to build this entity month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, then you never lose sight of I think the investment required to ensure that the choices you're making today are really for 36 months from now, not 90 days from now.
One of my least favorite things in strategy is quarterly planning. Like, you need quarterly planning, but if it's not tied beyond the fucking quarter, like, you're dead. You're just gonna make short-term decisions.
And in that environment, right? Like for me, if I'm going to be connected to something longer term, it's
Yeah,
generally not going to be, some form of simply a budget, objective or some sort of revenue milestone. There
yeah,
has to be some bigger purpose in which I believe as a teammate, as maybe a brand affiliate or as a client, that we are solving or providing some level of achievement around that is bigger than myself, is bigger than this, potential revenue objective.
it's like a relationship.
A relationship that,
It's like there's a reason why relationship advice doesn't start for this year's in your marriage, think about your quarterly deliverables.
yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, I married a finance econ major. She might appreciate some of that, but
Yeah, no, like a little
you
bit of
know,
that's good. You don't wanna lead with it. I
100,
yeah, I
100%.
I frequently put things on my calendar that Andrew doesn't know about so that I can be a good husband.
Yeah, yeah, I'll text her. We'll find out. Let's actually pull her in right now.
Yeah, like, yeah, bring her in. She's the smarter of the bunch.
To get back to your original question there, when are those moments where you've had to make some tough choices for the short term that might be painful, but you're really making those choices because you understand that this is a critical moment, that if I cut this corner now to simply get through maybe the next 90 in a little bit more of a, less stressful or frictional or some sort of easier way, what am I potentially sacrificing though for the greater good, purpose, and cause? That is the whole DNA of why we're even building this entity in the first place for year three versus month three. So I think when we're clear on that vision, both internally and externally, and we are unwavering to that level of commitment, that we're demonstrating at every step that what we are building is not simply for today, but for the greater good of tomorrow, then most of the time, I think the team appreciates and respects when we have to make those tough calls in the short term. They're willing to rally around it because there's a personal aspiration of what we're committed to and what we believe we're reaching for in the way of an objective, not just a financial.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean those moments when they do arise, I think your team's also watching, right? Both in your audience that you serve, externally within your client or membership base, but also internally. They're going to see how serious is John really? How
Yeah.
committed is he when he shares that this is where we are going, to where when these moments pop up to where we can take an easier path, is he going to choose the easier, or is he going to stay focused and dedicated to the long-term commitment of where we truly want to go? And in return, I will gauge then my level of investment back. And I think that's a powerful moment for any entity or company.
So that's like a huge part about growing a culture. It's like you follow your leader, right? And I believe that like best case scenario, you can kind of steer an organization. You can't control it. You can't force it. People like there's too much autonomy down the line, right? So the best thing you can do is lead by example and have values and like a mission that like clarify your goal. How would you reward your team when they made decisions that were really good for your mission and your purpose, but maybe not great for like this quarter?
For us, it came down to a philosophy that we integrated early on in our tenure, and it really came from basically spending time. interviewing on the front end what our doctors were looking for when it came to what truly brought them quality of life, not just revenue. And so, for many of us, from an entrepreneurial perspective, quality of life is real, right? Happiness is real. Fulfillment is something that may be considered just simply financial or revenue based, but a lot of that fulfillment comes from the intangible. And so, when we think about that cultural commitment to serve our membership, we made a choice early on that we were not going to have customers. We were not going to have clients. We were going to have members. And in order to have members, that meant that we had to move from being a transactional relationship with them to being an intrinsic relationship with them, which meant that we are not here for a blip in the radar. We are here with you for the life of your journey and of your practice. And therefore, we are intrinsic, not transactional. So, in order to actually facilitate that, that meant that we had to flip the switch from what can we do on your COGS or how can we improve your cost of goods to what is it that you're seeking and how do you define success personally, professionally, and financially. That three-legged objective, that three-legged approach, right? We knew that, like when Collins talks about that hedgehog effect, if we could take every small business owner's aspirations on a personal level with what does quality of life look like for them personally, what does quality of life look like for them professionally, and then to the extent that financially is not about a revenue objective, but about an investment opportunity, meaning what type of investment would they love to have this business be able to make back into them, right? Whether that's in bonus, whether that's in equity appreciation, right? Whether that's in net worth, right? Getting them to move from a net income mindset, right? And really understand the freedom that net worth creates, which is what business is about, especially entrepreneurship. Could we bring those three together? Personal aspirations, professional, and financial. And in the center of that nucleus could basically Audigy sit at the core. And so that resulted in this PPF philosophy, the personal, professional, financial.
Did everyone on your team know what PPF was?
In the beginning, no.
Well, yeah, in the beginning, it was just, I'm guessing you were like, oh, there's a problem. We can help audiologists. And then I'm guessing that it turned into like, okay, we see like there's some common trends in the problems we're being asked about, specifically the ones that like we might not really have anything to do with right now.
Correct. Yeah, no. And what was powerful is, I think just like, any of us in a leadership role, sometimes we don't always practice what we preach. So it's one thing to be able to make that commitment to the revenue aspect of what your business model depends on, right? Your primary client. But the reality is our primary audience is those that we serve internally first before those that we serve externally. And so we quickly moved from not only sharing that level of commitment as an entity and an organization to our doctors and to their teams, but to our own team. And I would say within the first probably 18 to 24 months of us introducing this concept of PPFs, or these personal, professional, and financial aspirations that we would model out when onboarding a new doctor, we started doing the same when onboarding a new teammate. And within a very short period, John, like I'm talking probably within less than 12 months, it changed everything from our annual reviews to our annual targets to budgeting to where slowly everything started to move around. What is it and how is it that we as an organization are not simply asking you to invest in us with giving a level of personal and professional commitment to the greater good and success of this position that you serve, but how can we match and make that same investment and a return commitment back to you with making this the greatest year you've ever had, both on a personal as well as a professional level? And then at that point, financially, none of us are sitting here because of an hourly paycheck. None of us are sitting here because of a merit increase. Does that financial investment matter? Of course it does, right? But it doesn't matter more to the extent that if I don't feel that I'm being supported personally and professionally, then at that point, the financial is not even relevant, right? Because I'm not at a good place.
Well, yeah, it's like, I mean, I love the research where it's like at a certain level, you get a raise and it's like 3 months later and the high burns off. It's like we're emotional critters as employees and professionals. Like we care about all sorts of stuff beyond money.
Well, and when you think about that financial aspect, like I mean, we had a team at peak of about 255 of us. And everyone had a PPF that we had identified both short and long term, 12 and 36. And it was in our internal, communication with, with each of our respective teammates, meaning daily they could see the progress they were making towards their PPF achievement. And for a lot of them, the financial was even from a quality of life side, paying off some debt, being able to acquire that first, new property or that new
Starter
home that they
home,
were seeing,
puppy,
whatever it might be,
baby,
right?
whatever it is,
Hey, getting married, right? Would love to
travel.
be able to take care of the wedding. I haven't had a chance to take my family to Disneyland. Would love to take this family to Disneyland. And so we would then take those financial aspirations, map them to those respective functionalities in those positions, and then come back with John's path to Disney 2026 for his family, and what do we need to be able to achieve to ensure that Audigy is able to make that investment back into John.
Dude, what a great example of turning something that's like transactional into a relationship. Like you're kind of like you're familiar with the idea like the foot in the door concept.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where it's like, yeah, you're cracking that door open. Where I'm guessing your team members the first time were like, why does Mason care? Why is he so interested in what like my financial goals are this year? And then you turn that into like annual plan. We're going to talk
Uh,
about it. I'm going to get deep into your life and support it
yeah.
based on
Yeah.
your terms. And then you do the same thing for those customers or members. I love it. So how you started at 23. At what point did you roll out PPF?
So I was 23 when we kicked off Audigy, and we probably rolled out the PPF piece by the time I was like 26. I became president at 29, and it happened a few years before that. So, yeah, I would say probably let's call it 2007, 2008.
So you were like 3 years in, you knew that audiologists needed some help. You're like, GPO makes sense, membership makes sense. And then as you're moving down, you're like, oh, I'm seeing parallels in all these conversations where like, if we want to talk about percent saved in this quarter, every quarter for the rest of my life, I should keep doing the same thing. But then you're like, if the relationships I like, I'm guessing you were drawn, knowing you were drawn to like, I like knowing that this person wants to open 3 sites. I like knowing that they wanna retire by the time they're 50. They've got 3 kids, they wanna send her to school, and then you're like, "Maybe I should start asking other people about this." And then that probably you're like, "Oh, shit, there's parallels."
And I think how much, so I've never, in my tenure, I've never applied for, in my professional career, I've never applied once for a position. I've never had a job description.
You've never applied for a job?
No, no, never applied for a job. I've never asked for a promotion. Never really officially have had an interview ever.
Okay, let's stop what we're doing right now, I'm gonna interview you quick. Tell me about your proudest achievement. What what makes you
Like,
qualified to touch
but
the highest in bourbon the world's ever seen?
I don't know. I'm still wondering that myself.
Oh,
But I
dude,
think
I
there's,
mean,
I,
like, way
I
to
think
find a
there's,
widget. It's just fantastic.
but I think there's a piece of too many of us that fall into that mindset is so powerful in life, right? So, I would say less about the tools in my toolbox, right? Especially knowing like, a little bit of my background, from very humble beginnings in Southern Arizona, when in your, mom and dad own antique shops, not a very lucrative lifestyle. But
Well,
I
you
think
and
the
me both. Like,
power,
we grew up,
yeah. but
we
but
lived that life. It was good.
the power and where each of us have the opportunity to go, I have always felt is not based upon title. It's not based upon simply a degree or a diploma, and it's not based around the traditional systems that are in place that say, okay, you've been here for 3 years, you now qualify for a review for a potential, promotion. I never thought that way. In my mindset, everything in life is that nuance effect to me is your own perspective of how you're able to filter the opportunities in the world and in front of you and try to live in a way where you're present enough to where this gift that each of us are born with, which is that power of your own mindset and perspective, that power of your gut and your intuition combined with that heart and soul and your compassion, empathy. Like if you could bring those three things together and that's your internal compass, it generally will never steer you wrong. But unfortunately, sometimes we fall into the noise. Sometimes we fall into the insecurities. Sometimes we fall into the societal expectations of this is what a quote unquote president looks like, right?
We start managing each other instead of like actually having a relationship and trying to like understand why people are coming at work, why they might not want to do what you're asking. Cause you find these little like these little insights and they can like just get your business rocket fuel where it's like, why doesn't Alex like doing this? And it's like, maybe because it's not effective and takes too long.
If you came to me and said, Mason, you're working 40 hours a week, you're in an outbound caller position. I need you to make more calls because this is the new quota that we need to hit. I'm probably going to look at you and go, you know what? I'm already putting in a lot of time. I don't see how there's going to be feasibility in me being able to, add more hours to my week. And I think that quota is just generic. Quite frankly, it's some random expectation from maybe somebody in a leadership role that hasn't actually sat in this seat. And so do I really buy in, as the individual in these, positions across the organization to, these high level top down objectives or quotas or targets? Generally not, right? But if I reverse that perspective and start with what is it that you're aspiring to achieve for yourself over the next 3 years, and how can we be that organization? How can this be that team that helps ensure that without fail, those personal, those professional, and those financial opportunities can be presented to you? But this is what that investment is going to require from you. And in return, what we then will be able to match back. Now I get to have some level of drive in where like I'm taking the company to this next threshold because I understand this is the impact that it's going to have on my quality of life based around the impact I'm going to have on this team. That mindset shift, like that's where we had teammates, including myself, where it's like I never looked at the week as, oh, I got 40 hours this week. I always looked at the week as I'm going to have 30 wins. And those 30 wins are going to result into this, right? So instead of looking at having a win a day for the month, I'm looking at how do I have 8 opportunities every day to be able to have a win, right? Because I know what that win represents to my ability to either provide for my family or for whatever kind of quality of life I'm seeking outside of the office.
Okay, so PPF. I talk about my terrible strategies kind of a lot in my personal life where it's like, oh, I did this thing that like if I was in corporate America, I would probably get performance plan for suggesting some of my best strategies. Cause it's like sometimes you need to do stuff that's totally out of left field to drive something forward. Can you tell me, like, give me an example of something you did that would have never flown just because you knew it would pump your team up? I'll give you an example. I used to this terrible strategy. No one should do this. Worked really well. When we were starting care, when we were at like 10 people, anytime someone would quit, I would take their entire comp and I give it to the team
Mm.
as as merit-based raises. That's how I figured out how important it is to give people raises consistently if they're like younger millennials or Gen Z. Like you got to give them raises every 6 to 12 months. Otherwise, they're like they would rather have smaller, more frequent gestures that show that like they're
Yeah,
making progress in their career than wait 3 years for a performance plan and get some cola along the way.
totally.
So, like, that led to such low turnover because it's like, I thought of it as a task on bad management. I'm like, if
Or
I chase
people
someone
encouraging the
away.
bad apples, get out. Let's get the bad apple
Yeah,
out. We're gonna pick up the remaining cob. They'll self police and push their own out.
dude, yeah, we also did the Zappos thing where we would give people we would offer them money to quit if we knew it wasn't a good fit in the first couple of weeks. We'd be like, "Counterpoint, you take that other job you were talking about, we'll give you $5,000 and we're sorry this didn't work."
Yeah, no, I
Which is
like it.
great. It's like, dude, you poison the well and it's poisoned.
100%. I would say something I started doing early on, and granted, it was a little bit of a different environment. 10 years ago, we were inside of a traditional office environment or, physical building where we were all centrally located. But I spent an hour in the morning and an hour before end of day, essentially joining team meetings, join huddles more organically, right? Like not scheduled, not on the calendar. The team, even to this day, they'll still joke about, great, Mason's doing a pop in. And a lot of times that was a temperature check for me, right? Like that was to just kind of assess like how's the mood and how's the energy within the organization, today as we, kick things off on a Tuesday or on a Wednesday. But also at the end of the day with, were there any tough moments that maybe we had in certain divisions or departments? And you could really pick that up, right? You're not always going to catch that in an email. You're not always going to catch that in a spreadsheet or even in your Salesforce or whatever you utilize and kind of, manage your workflow.
Yeah, no, you gotta catch the side eye. You gotta catch, like, when people start lowering their voice when you walk up, where it's like, "That's not great."
But I
If
love
every time
that,
you walk
right?
up to a team, they get quiet, that's like, "Dude, tell
Yeah.
me the gossip.
So you
What
really
did I
gonna
do
come in here?
wrong? What do we
Everybody
need to
look busy.
change?"
But
Yeah.
for me, what that also allowed was, your team gets to understand that you don't just show up when things are really good and you don't just show up when things are really bad, right? You're part of the DNA of this culture. And so you're there with them, right? Throughout the days, the weeks. And so as a result, you'd hear things around like, hey, so and so just passed, their level 2 SOM course. And I'm like, what? Like, John, when did you start
As one
doing that?
does.
Right. And, it's a passion for John. And so those moments I always looked for on a daily basis to see what little, maybe little milestones or achievements were happening outside of, our entity that we could lean into and support.
Would you recognize them verbally? Would you buy the som, a nice bottle of wine? Like,
Both, right? So, whether it's a bottle of wine that I'm picking up for them the next day to say, hey, congratulations. I'd love for you to crack this bottle and share with me some of the insights that you've learned that I just don't know, right? Or somebody announcing that, they are expecting and, sending them to dinner to celebrate or, just gestures that don't have to always be, I don't know, in an SOP that are kind of become, I don't know, expectation within the culture. It's those surprise and delights that I still live for that show a genuine level of, care and heart and soul that you have in a leadership role for the team culture, not just for the business objective. And so that was something that I loved doing that that I did frequently.
I love the consistency in that. Like, you made it part of was this part of your day, part of your week?
I mean, obviously the goal was daily, right? And sometimes I would say within reason, at least 2 to 3 times that week, you'd find or hear something that you were able to kind of surprise somebody and let them know that, they're appreciated, not just here, but outside based on whatever it is that they've accomplished. And so, yeah, so I loved it.
I feel like you would have some sales tips specifically for your members. Tell me, like, what's like a bank shot move that you would go to when you were kind of like losing an audiologist in the first couple of calls?
I mean, for me, often it's just the traditional conversation that most of us have is, we're being sold consistently something that somebody believes is going to solve some problem or deliver some sort of revenue objective. And most of the time, it's a 1-to-1 value ratio. And when you could change that conversation up, with those kind of those aspirational discussion points around the PPFs, now all of a sudden I'm not playing for whether or not I have the cheapest cogs. I'm not playing for whether or not I think you should move supply partners. I'm just simply wanting to understand where in your current ecosystem has somebody leaned into John over the last 12 months in a way to where they've impacted the quality of your life personally, professionally, and financially from a goal attainment, not an income objective. And if you don't have that individual there today, who could that individual be? And if they're not in your ecosystem, then this opportunity might be uniquely different for the first time. Somebody is here to have a conversation around where you desire to be and how can I help be that trusted advisor to you, not somebody trying to convince you that you need to switch products, you need to switch pricing, you need to switch service providers. That is 99% of the noise, right? And so I think the opportunity that I was always seeking was not to close and not to sell, but to earn the right to be your trusted advisor. And so what that meant was whether that started today, whether that started a month from today, or a year from today, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, because those aspirations you have are only going to grow and become stronger, and your conviction to achieve them, hopefully just as committed, if not more. And I could not wait for the opportunity where I could be a teammate to complement and amplify your ability to reach those.
So I thought for sure you were going to talk about something to like create urgency, but you went the totally
Yes.
opposite way where you're like, hey, if I'm going to be your partner long term, it's okay if we start in a year.
Yeah. And for me, like, I have many friends that are friends. I have many
Yeah.
members, right, that became
Well, I
friends
mean, members
before they
became
became,
friends, right?
yeah, before they became part of like our entity or our company, right? And so I love that, right? And granted, every model's different. Everybody's in a different position with, revenue objectives and, early stage, mid stage, late stage, when it comes to their startup. But if you truly lean into that side of you, I think that often, right? Same for me. I didn't necessarily apply for these positions, but others saw you and wanted you to be in that seat before you even asked to serve in that seat because of how you showed up already, right? So, with or without the title of being their management company, I wanted to be that teammate, that friend, that potential trusted advisor. And I was willing to put in the investment because it was truly within reason, there for the right reasons for them, not just for me.
Way to just like live your values. It's good. Okay. So let's talk about you climbing into caves in the desert. I feel like one of the things that makes you so interesting is I would say you basically have had a job since the moment
You were
your
born.
parents could justify you had a job, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I live that too. So, can you
yeah.
tell a brief story of driving out into the desert and looking for treasure?
So we've been in the American West for 5 generations, homesteaded Arizona territory, and I grew up in Southern Arizona in Country Emporium Antiques, a small antique shop at the kind of base of the Catalina foothills in Tucson, against the Rito Wash, and envision a dirt parking lot and a stagecoach out front, and Mexican carretas that would pick up out of Juarez, and the
Yep.
front of the home was essentially the antique shop, and my bedroom window, along with my sisters, looked into the antique shop. And so every day, you're working in support of your mom and dad to,
Yep.
I would say, not necessarily build a business, but there was clearly a adventure that they were living, and Country Emporium allowed for us to write the chapters.
Yeah, it's less of running a business, right? It's more like the business is part of your life.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, you're open when people show up and you're free, right?
Yeah. Somebody rings that doorbell, at midnight because they're a picker that just came in from Texas. And, this is back in the 80s and 90s. You're not only welcoming them at midnight, but you're fixing them supper, inviting them in, cooking them a little bit of a meal, and then they're gonna probably crash out front in their rig. And then the next morning you're gonna get up and dig through their horse trailer and figure out what saddles you think you want and all that kind of good stuff. But
Yeah, we're gonna figure some trades out. So,
yeah.
you would literally go into the desert, though, and find old mines and, like,
Yeah.
this is me trying
Yeah.
to lay down. But like that, you would do that, right?
Yeah, there's so we specialize in Native Americana, Cowboy Americana, and then like mining relics and some stuff from the railroad days. And so back in the 80s, obviously, the internet was not yet around.
Which is too bad because, like, let's talk about the best social media channel ever.
So, you would have people that come into your store and they'd share with you that, hey, they had seen, an ore car laying in the middle of the desert over near this particular mountain a couple years back. And so dad would kind of keep this yellow pad and keep some notes down throughout the days and the weeks. And then when, a weekend came up, we are like, you know what, let's drive out to Douglas or to Tombstone, and let's see if we can't maybe track down those tailings or those mining tailings that that one gentleman was sharing. And we would find, we'd find some tailings, and often you have A-frames in the desert, or you'd have some mesquites, right? And so we'd tie off on an A-frame or tie off on some mesquites, and basically just swing over the shaft. Now this is after we kick some rocks in, make sure there was no rattlesnakes, because often in the desert, the
I mean,
mines are
safety check. You
cool.
toss a rock in, the rattlesnake will say like, "Hey, this is my house."
So,
That's how they're. That's how
yeah,
they do, right?
pretty much. Very tactical, John.
Then you sit your
So
sister down. That's the second level of safety check.
Misty, go check this out. So
Missy,
we, ki-
I saw a necklace.
yeah, so I'd kick some rocks in, make sure there's no snakes, and
Yep.
it's always kind of, I'd say maybe about 25% of the time you'd have some rattlers in there, and you'd maybe just see if you can't find the air shaft, or find a different shaft to go in. But so you'd splunk down in, and it was at the time, right? Like, I looked at it as you heard the lore in the antique shop, meaning the folklore, the story. We kind of been stewing on it for whether it was weeks or months, that, we'd kind of talk about around the dinner table. And remember that, old timer that came in here was talking about the such and such mine. And so, you go out there and see if you can't locate some of this. And often you have a lot of ranchers that would come in and say, I've got a couple mines on my ranch, and you're welcome to come out and do a little picking. And so when you pull out some of these pieces, or you'd find some dynamite boxes, right, in some of these old shafts, and a lot of old Apache powder, Hercules, and different dynamite boxes from the turn of the century. And, it's like finding this little treasure, and you get to ensure that it lives on for hopefully another generation to come, and it has a story to be shared. And so I loved it. It was always an adventure. At 5, you essentially, kind of the rule of thumb with with mom and dad was, at 5 you're within reason old enough to kind of help out, and so you go on your first picking trip. And by the time you can write decent, maybe around 7, dad would give you a yellow pad. And my job was to kind of basically mark on the yellow pad when we were in, Silver City, and we met with this family and picked up a bridle or a saddle, who the family was, what the piece was. I'd write down what we paid for it, right? And so if we got back from that pick and trip, whatever dad kind of spent, he would give you a bit of a commission, or kind of like a fee. And I could use that
Yeah.
as essentially my
Depending
own
on how
money
much
to.
money is in the till, right?
Yeah. Well, I would use it as a credit to buy, my own pieces for the antique shop that I was interested in, and I'd write on the little, like, tags, MBW, for my 3 initials, Mason Blue Walker. And I'd always tell guests in the antique shop, if you see that MBW tag, John, know that there's no state sales tax on that. That's friends and family.
So this got you, I'm guessing, like this whole experience got you deep into like how this legacy and lore comes together, right? Like you became deeply interested in like history and Americana, and that turned into collecting bourbon.
I think the aspiration for all of us is that ultimately our brand equity is in the culture, right? It's in the experience. It's in the extraordinary people that I interface or come into contact with on behalf of a brand. The product is just ancillary, right? Like, within reason, I can buy good product from a variety of places depending on what industry I'm in. And I think the antique shop taught me a lot about that, right? And that is, we were not there. There was no way to necessarily know what things were trending in the 80s that had different degrees of margin or higher profitability. And, like, so you just kind of have to live, right? Live in a way to where when you show up, you're actually living for that moment, because we didn't know who was going to come into the shop from one day to the next. You don't know what you might find when somebody invites you onto their ranch or into their home. And so you have to truly be present. You have to listen, right? You have to really thoughtfully engage to make sure that there's a level of trust that they want to share some of their family's, journey or life story, or certain memories or artifacts that are acting as a symbolism of them coming west. And they go, you know what, John, we've held on to this for 2 generations, but today I want to share this with you. And I don't know what it's worth, but I feel like you're going to ensure that it's had its time, it's had its adventure within our family, but now it has the ability maybe to live on for a new family, and for, a new individual to potentially connect with. And so I loved that. And so what that means is that when you live, you show up in a way to where you're present, but you also show up in a way to where you have an appreciation for the context of how did that family and how did these pieces arrive and get to this moment, right? And so that's history, that's heritage, that's legacy. Two is these pieces were not something that I think just like from a teammate. I don't always know like, oh, I think we need somebody with 18 years of experience, these 2 degrees, working in these 2 industries. Like, come on, right? But the stories in which somebody has to share is when I generally see, wait a minute,
Yeah.
when they share that story, I can now see how they might write a chapter of that journey that they have been on with us and our journey. And I can see how our organization can benefit from having this individual as a key character write that kind of chapter for us, right? Well, the same way when you're in somebody's, home or residence is there's this love of folklore and this gift of story. And then third is this appreciation for community, meaning like when we would drive around, like we'd pop into a diner, we'd pop into a mercantile, right? We'd pop into a
Yep.
hardware store and say howdy, and hang out for a little while and kind of shoot the bull. And somebody then in the diner, in the mercantile, or in the hardware store is going to go, you know what? I think there's somebody you should probably meet. And that power of community, right? Today we call it, networking, right? But
Yeah.
that power of community is so real in every door that's been opened for not only what I saw at Country Emporium for my mom and dad, but every door that's been opened for me to where I have the fortunate, pleasure to say that I have not applied for a position ever in my career. I have not had a resume because you live a certain brand ethos. And in return, that brand ethos is appreciated and in return invested back to where people see things for you that they want to share.
So I'm gonna fast forward like 5-year-old you shooting the ball in a hardware store to like Mason in his 40s collecting bourbon. You have like an exceptional bourbon collection, right?
I've got a couple bottles laying around.
You had a couple bottles. Like if you were gonna rank, like what percent would you be? Are you at the top 1% for bourbon collections?
Yeah, I would say there's a handful of us. There's only a handful that I know of. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's more individuals that are out there that just have not disclosed, but
Yeah.
there's probably 4 or 5 of us, in the US that I believe have a collection that spans not only certain chapters or iterations of American whiskey and certain distilleries, but certain expressions that really kind
Yep.
of represent a catalyst, so to speak, in that particular decade. So, yeah, so the collection that I have today represents bottles that date back to the Civil War, that date back to the turn of the century, that are pre-prohibition, that are prohibition. So,
Which bottle are you most proud of?
ooh, I've got like I have 4 love bugs. It's like saying like, which kid do you love the most? Today.
How about 2?
There's 2 expressions or 2 bottles that I really, and I've never considered myself a collector or connoisseur. I've always just considered myself a fan, right? Like there's certain things that bring you joy, and when you find those things that bring you joy, whether that's for some it's culinary, right? For some it could be watches. For some it could be uh, you know sports memorabilia. For me, obviously, I love the history of the U.S. and the story it tells with American spirits, and I love the history of the American West and the role that the saloon played in the West as kind of like the town hall and kind of the community place. So I would say there's a particular bottle called 19. It's Old Overholt, which is a Pennsylvania original base distillery, one of the oldest, kind of brands that we have left in the United
Yep.
States, still around today. And there's basically certain cases of Old Overholt that were bottled right before Prohibition for the Mellon family in New York. And family was very prominent in New York City as well as at a banking level, and then also at a DC level in governmental positions that they held. In some cases, let's say, were curated for the family and brought into the city before Prohibition. And I have one of those cases, and So the history and just the story that it tells of the family, of the distillery.
Is that one you bought through Sotheby's, or was that one you picked up?
So I originally had a bottle that I fell in love with through a friend that bought him, that was able to get a hold of it from Christie's. And then I picked up some from some good friends that I have over at Sotheby's. And it's amazing. And when my pops passed away, unfortunately in 2017, it's like, what do to me, spirits are a piece of, a celebratory, moments that, you can share and, crack this bottle and hopefully relive that memory. And so for me, I opened up one of those bottles in 1908 to pay tribute to my pops. And I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget some of the stories that were shared. And that expression allowed all of it to come together because we were sipping on something that, sincerely was bottled over a century ago. Right. So that's a favorite piece.
That's a great piece. And I mean, like, honestly, when I think about what you're doing with Bourbon Lore, which I'll explain quickly, Mason's starting a lifestyle brand that is beyond exclusive. Like, entry point to be involved in this is like six figures, um, which is like, it's just incredible. Like, you want to get access to the most exclusive bourbon in the world in the most exclusive places in the world. Like, Bourbon Lore's it's gonna blow up. I'm a fan. But I think the reason you were able to get, like, you have 5 of the biggest distillers, biggest American distillers on your board. I think the reason you were able to do that is because 'cause you've been into this because you're into this for what, 25 years?
It's been a while. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously
but I
as a
mean,
yeah,
like,
I'm
you
only
were doing it before it's
44.
cool, and you were
Yeah.
understanding the why, and you're creating
Yeah.
literature around,
Uh,
like, why these things are more than just an old bottle of liquor. They're history.
Correct.
They're like part of the fabric of America, which is like so cool. And if I was like fifth generation distiller, like I would resonate with that so hard.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored and grateful to bring together something that our aspiration is to be able to serve the history and heritage of Americana, the American West, through utilizing America's spirit bourbon and the incredible chapters that it's written that I don't believe should be forgotten or lost that have allowed for our spirit to become, truly the second most valuable spirit in the world.
Well, I mean, they won't be forgotten or lost because you're doing something to preserve it.
Yeah. One chapter at a time. But yes, thank you.
And you're like doing this beautiful thing where like you're taking competitors and putting them in the same room to create a bigger pie rather than try to just steal a piece.
I would say to that point, for many of us, yes, obviously product sales are important, store representation, but we're not that, right? We're here to help that distiller, that family, the heritage and kind of that legacy live on and create what we call, like within bourbon lore, our aspiration is to create living lore with these experiences, these events, these moments, and in return, some of these limited edition releases for our membership. And as a result, for me, that allows for us to then have a defining moment, right? A signature experience that I'll never forget. And then I want to share that with those I meet because it brought me joy. And I think that type of brand development, that type of word of mouth, and being able to contribute, to somebody that you meet this amazing, event or experience that you attended allows for you then to kind of become legend in your own way that maybe isn't just simply based around some of the traditional metrics that we place on success, right? And so then those releases that we have hopefully symbolize that moment for the member to where now the next time they open that bottle, the next time they gift that bottle, they have a true story to share that is absolutely remarkable. And it continues the energy, the momentum, and in return, the movement around this category that I love.
I mean, it's brilliant. I think it's going to be like it's one of these businesses where I picture it moving really slow day to day, but at some point you're going to have these parabolic moments. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be like, I'm
I
sure
appreciate it.
Audigy was more like, oh, we're growing 30-40% a year every year and that's like how we compound. I have a feeling you're going to be like, oh shit, 27's a banger.
The momentum that I think we create, I've always been obsessed around how do I establish a level of energy, with whatever we're affiliated with to where it's contagious, right? And from that energy, if I then can wrap that, which really that energy means we build a community first, right? And then when I build that community and bring them something special, it creates an energy within that respective community that hopefully is our spark, right? Well, now my responsibility is to wrap that community with a platform, which really means I'm creating momentum around that community for that energy to continue to evolve, develop, and grow. And then ultimately, I will bring, our responsibility is to bring in an ecosystem and that third pillar that allows for this to not just simply be something that exists for a year or two, but then allows for this to be something that 20 years from now becomes a legacy play, not a revenue play. So those are the aspirations, and I think similar to the nuance effect, it's just what is the nuance of how each of us approach different opportunities, positions, or entities. And for me, it's community first, platform second, and then wrap it with an ecosystem. So
And the interesting thing is, I didn't hear one thing about your finance within that answer, which I think is exactly like you're taking this with such a
oh,
patient approach. It's which I think is what it needs. Like you can't
yeah,
force culture. You can't force relationships to form. You can't create a legend just because you want to.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
Well
I'm
said.
bullish. If people want to follow Bourbon Lore, what's the handle?
Yeah, Bourbon Lore on Instagram, Bourbon Lore on LinkedIn, Bourbon Lore on YouTube, and then also you can kind of bourbonlore.com and register there.
Sounds like Bourbon Lore.
My
You
love
got
of bourbon and
anything?
my
You're
love of
like except for
folklore.
Snap, none of that.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I'm
Yeah,
obviously a big
thank you,
fan
Mason.
of yours, John, and incredibly proud to be able to share this moment with you, and excited to see what this evolves into as well. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure. And dude, I just love spending time with you. You're so entertaining. You're such a good leader.
Uh, Thank you.